record for programme. This is Jim O'Callaghan of Radio UK 5, bringing you another episode of The Blood of the Conquistadors. I will be revealing the story of the most brutal of all the Spanish explorers, the conqueror of Peru, Francisco Pizarro. I am in Lima, the capital of Peru. It's Good Friday, and we are going to church. But before we get going, I have a question for you. Did you ever stop and think what is meant by the word church? So, what is a church? What is a chapel? An abbey? A priory? A cathedral? What ridiculous questions, you might well say. Sure, all of us in the Christian tradition know what these terms are. But do we? Do we really? When you start looking closely at the labels and examining their context and history, the subject becomes ever more complex. And although I'm considered somewhat of an expert on the subject, damned if I know the whole story. I'll just hint at some of the complexity. I was brought up referring to our main place of Catholic worship as the chapel, and the older Protestant building, which before the Reformation was Catholic anyway, as the Church of Ireland place. And we definitely went to Mass on Sunday rather than church. We certainly did not attend chapel, but we could go to the chapel. Chapel goes way back to Gaul and the Shrine of the Cloak, Capella of Martin of Tours, and it is sometimes used more secularly today. The National Union of Journalists, of which I'm a member, form chapels. Even church itself didn't sit well with Catholics at all. It sounded a bit Saxon. Shades of digging with the other foot. But sometimes we had the best of worlds growing up in Ireland. We went to the Abbey on Sundays, that is, Mass, but took pews in our favourite place in the side chapel. And chapels, strictly speaking, weren't even supposed to have pastors or congregations. We Irish had our special, ages-old ecclesiastical convolutions. I suppose we were putting things in their places. They're reformed and re-reformed complex places, playing to a historic hymn sheet we hardly knew was there. God forbid that on a tour we should ever bless ourselves passing by a Protestant church. We were obliged to be ever vigilant against heretics. Untangling and describing all this might merit a book of its own. Pause. Recording aside to my editor, Bill. This intro could get very long, Bill. Very all over the place. Just going down the chapel road alone. Maybe there is a book in it. But I'm disciplined, focused. You had a hand in that. I'll rein myself in. It's a good intro, though, don't you think? The personal, the grand sweep of the subject, and then the focus on my Irish point of view. I'm leaving you with little to do, as usual, you lazy head office buggers, exploiting poor immigrants like myself to do all the work. Research, sound recording, travel arrangements. Okay, your secretary did most of that, I'll allow. Security. I was robbed of my watch last night in the street at knife point. Can I put that down to expenses? Rolex Daytona gold, of course. And insurance, compo for PTSD and all that. That should be good for a few grand. I have to be devious in building up for my retirement. I guess you'll pass on damned. We are, after all, in the 1980s. Back to the grindstone. Where was I? Yes. Record for programme. But there is one area of Christian architectural nomenclature where there is no confusion. Basilicas. There are the Basilica Major, Pope-centered in Rome, and all the worldwide rest being Basilica Minor, of course. And I'm in one now, Basilica Metropolitana Catedral de Lima. I'm here in a long queue to see a relic of the True Cross, loaned by the Basilica Santo Domingo de la Vera Cruz for a special exposition on this Good Friday. And I'm also here because it is the final resting place of our arch-villain, Francisco Pizarro Gonzalez. Pause. Record to editor. Do you like that, Bill? Good, isn't it? Don't you just love the names? Of course, being non-practicing for decades, I obviously don't believe in the cross relic thing, but it does retain a certain fascination. It's not too long ago, just 10 years, that statues went walkabouts in Ireland. I'm sure that story was played up by you guys in the UK. The gullible, priest-ridden Irish trope. The English love it when we are seen to revert to the Father Ted stereotype. You'll enjoy the inserted local sound bites, the quiet shuffling of the queue, the weird mutterings of the gullible pilgrims, and so on. Another scintillating radio magazine program. A prize winner? A raise? Whichever. I have some time to kill, time to reflect on the 16th century here in Peru. Record for program. They were dark people, the conquistadors, gold, greedy, obsessive, and utterly ruthless. But you'd have to say also God-fearing. Francisco Pizarro and his half-brothers and cousins epitomized these savage characteristics. And their black-hooded prelates, the Dominicans, nicknamed aptly Dominicanes, the hounds of God, were no better. Some were trained in the dark arts of the Inquisition. There were others who were gifted administrators, entrusted by Rome to get the very last cent of the church's take from the plunder of the New World. Pause. Record to editor. Hope you pick up this whisper. Thought I could continue speaking into the Sony and even take out my Nikon and get a few pictures. But it doesn't feel right. Not safe. I'm attracting too much attention as it is with the narration. The Indios might think I'm being cynical, brash, disrespectful. It's difficult to read their faces in the queue. Are they hostile? Would they attack me? Might they crucify me? Good Friday! Good Jesus! Hardly. But I do feel I'm one tall, white, square peg in a round hole. Worse, they might think of me as an Americano and tie me in with the attack helicopters used by the government against the leftist guerrillas. Nothing for it now but to put my gear away and get on with kissing the relic and doing it properly, genuflecting and blessing oneself like the practiced Catholic I used to be. So, here goes. Pause. Record to editor. I just got up from the kneeler in front of the priest holding the encased relic, and have made my way into the body of the church. I'm now in a pew, still posing piously. What's my next move? Arrange my thoughts around the whole cross relics thing. To be skeptical or semi-skeptical. Scientific. Nice scent. Must be incense. And there it ends. The recorded narrative from before. I have kept it all these years. It serves to remind me of when I lived a frivolous, pompous, egocentric life, juggling with history and making clever arse observations to serve my claptrap narratives. It reminds me of a time before when we thought there were certainties. In the basilica that day, I collapsed in the pew. I came to. I had been out for the count. I was exposed. My shorts and underpants were around my ankles, and my t-shirt was rucked up to my armpits. The money belt with my traveller's checks, a few $100, and the passport was gone, as was the bag and the camera. I was left clutching the compact tape recorder, as if I was still narrating. As feeling seeped back, I felt enveloped, protected, embraced warmly by a presence. It was as if I had been reborn, had entered another world. I felt quietly happy, peaceful, like when I was a child cosseted by my mother. It was not disturbing, but fitting, I felt, that I was naked, in a church, possessionless, at the ends of the earth. I stumbled to my feet. The Indios, seated or kneeling in the nave, looked on implacably. And then Charlie Chaplin appeared. He wasn't really Charlie Chaplin. He just had a tuft of a moustache and that half weaselly, half coquettish smile of that comedian. But he was empathetic. He brought me to my feet and helped me out of the church. He found my hotel, from my key wristband, I presume, and checked me out. He worried for me and at the amount of money I had lost. Gringuito, millones! I didn't care, but he insisted on making a claim. It was muy complicado, he said. He took me in tow and arranged to see a public notary he knew. Money soon came in from Thomas Cook Travel. Charlie was a dote. I went to live with him in a barrio. We had many adventures together. He was very popular, had many girlfriends and boyfriends. We drank a lot and took some drugs. I don't know how long it was before the Irish Honorary Consul intervened, undoubtedly put up to it by family and UK5, got me a new passport and tricked me onto a plane to Europe. I had been perfectly happy where I was. My wife and kids met me at Heathrow. I felt good, looked good, I was told, and was calm. I resumed my work as a journalist. My radio station boss, Bill, was happy for a time with the tapes and notes I had posted to him. Plenty of rich copy there for the series, he said. I just talked through my recordings as requested. The last one seemed to amuse them. What happened in the church after kissing the relic? Did you have a conversion, Paddy? Firstly, it was the basilica, a basilica minor, I corrected them. And secondly, I said, I've crossed over to a different world, into the warp and weft of a history I glory in, a new reality. You dupes live like snails at the bottom of the pond. I pity you. And thirdly, my name is Jim, you racist English bastards. They gaped, they were shocked, even more so as I delivered the same in a calm, quiet way. I had nothing more to say. I'd already gone too far. They wouldn't understand, couldn't understand. Soon after, Bill asked me to take sick leave. My wife insisted that I had changed, become distant since I came back. She said I was racked with nightmares and had delusions of being imprisoned in Peru. She claimed I talked in my sleep in Spanish and in a strange Indian language. Sex, she declared, was perfunctory. She really didn't get it. I was never imprisoned. I just experienced a transformation. I now live in a different world. And yes, I did speak some Spanish in Quechua then. Of course, I'm fluent now. And it's true, sex was not interesting to me after returning to England. She insisted I saw a psychiatrist. I did, but I refused medication. I'd read about those drugs. No way would I suppress or risk distorting my reality. Eventually, she sought a divorce. I didn't contest it. And although I continued to support my children, I drew away from them. They took their mother's side. Fair enough. At first, there were dreams, vaporous figures drifting against sumptuous Baroque backgrounds. But then a courtly figure held out a hand to me and said, "Come with us." Soon I was mingling with the ruling classes of Peru in or about the 16th century. I often found myself at the tables of Francisco Pizarro in his palaces in Cusco and Lima. Francisco and his comrades were not the brutal, demonic, driven men I'd previously imagined and described. In reality, they were wonderful company, great raconteurs, grand in their manners. And why wouldn't they, being exposed to the powerful and graceful courts of Castile? They were so courageous, crossing half the globe in leaking sailing vessels built like tubs. They were tempered by extraordinary dangers and privations, and had more exotic adventures than almost anyone who had ever lived before. Here, in the heart of the Inca Empire, they were getting their just deserts. They took a land, just 200 of them against millions, a land that had unspeakable wealth in gold and silver. They consolidated their hold on the fallen empire by taking Inca princesses as their concubines and wives, sometimes with full Spanish privileges. Mixing bloods was an actual policy. And the Dominicans? Hounds of God? No. They are first-rate scholars, and many are from aristocratic families. One of them happens to be a nephew of the Grand Inquisitor himself, Torquemada, the hammer of heretics. Another is researching a Spanish Quechua dictionary and taught me. The Blackfriars surprised me with their learning and their generous attitudes towards the Indios. The priests shake their heads in sadness at the dreadful numbers of nativos succumbing to the pox. In private, I also hear them murmur that Pizarro was a hijo illegítimo and a ravening wolf among sheep, that he was an illiterate swineherd and bloodthirsty torturer. All this doesn't stop them from taking taxes and building their extravagant churches, monasteries, nunneries, and basilicas. And in their chronicles, they lie, doing a thorough job of writing their Inca allies out of the story. Without those allies, there could not have been a conquest. And yet, I'm fond of the friars, and quite delighted to be with them. And nothing can shake me from my love and respect of Pizarro. He is my Inca, my lord. I refuse to accept the modern slander that he was one of the most evil men in history. The Inca chiefs present at these feasts, including the Emperor Atahualpa, are really so clever to have learned Spanish quickly. They recognize and seem to accept their fate to be overrun as they overran others. And they debate politics and negotiate alliances, every bit as complicated and devious as the Europeans. And, of course, they revolted many times. And when they did, the Spanish invariably slaughtered them and enslaved the survivors. I don't know how or if this is going to end. Many of the meetings, happenings, seem to time shift, and people who were dead, often murdered by the present company, share in the party. Atahualpa, imposingly handsome and tall, talked drunkenly with Francisco over his own garroting. I gave you everything, my favourite sister as wife, a palace filled with gold and silver, as you demanded. You should not have listened to your bloody priests and my half-brother. We could have gloriously ruled together in peace. More of your wonderful Ribadavia, por favor. I feel so privileged to be able to live alongside, to interact with these extraordinary people. Francisco, my hero, achieved so much in one lifetime, and yet he bowed humbly to his God. He carried the cross of the crucifixion on his back for the original church that became the magnificent Metropolitano. His daughter and king contributed 15,000 gold pesos, almost half a ton of gold, to the later rebuilding. But I also weep because of what I know. True to the conquistadors' often irascible natures, they murdered their own also. Francisco was assassinated by his former friends and allies, the Almagros. While struggling with his breastplate after being attacked, he killed two of his assassins. Pulling his rapier out of a third, he was brought down finally by a dagger stab to his unprotected throat. He was a formidable warrior, even in his 60s. His lacerated skull was discovered centuries later in a lead casket in the foundations of the many times rebuilt Metropolitano. In my world, I see all this, but Francisco keeps his head. He is immortal. My information from my modern time amused the Dominicans no end. My dear friend from half a millennium in the future, there is ever but one God, one church, and one pope ruling over all. The minor disturbances caused by that Augustinian bastardo in Germany and the English heretic queen will be swept away into the gutters of hell. It would be too complicated to try to engage them on that one. I'm aware that I'm an outsider in the 16th century, but I have an audience. I'm also an outsider in the 21st century, and no one is interested in what I know. I'm impatient to become fully absorbed by my Peruvian history. I guess that will come. I revel in the sounds, sights, even smells, incense of the places and ghosts. That's what one of my psychiatrists told me they were, that people my tableaus. Occasionally, I get other glimpses of events. I watched the landing of the earliest Christians in Ireland 2 centuries after Christ. What took them so long? I watched as they prostrated themselves on the beach and gave thanks to their God. I watched them as they drew their boat onto land, overturned and blessed it as their first church, although they probably called it by the Greek name Kirkos, or circus in Latin. The Irish native warriors looked on laconically, wondering what these grubby, hirsute, mad-eyed men and women were about, with no weapons and nothing obvious to trade. I am here. I want to be here. But I don't know if I'll always be here. I don't know the rules. I don't know if there are any. Do I learn anything from it? I don't know. Does it matter? Probably not. What is real? This or that? Like the unknowability of the dark energy and dark matter of our universe, this reality is my own intimate darkness. I go where it leads.